Hi, and welcome back to the Up and Coming Photography Podcast. I'm Christian. I'm a filmmaker.
Photography podcast?
Huh? I don't know what's
Is
happening
there a secret
anymore.
podcast you want to
Yeah.
tell me about?
Hi, and welcome back to the Up and Coming Artist Podcast. I'm Christian. I'm a filmmaker.
And I'm Ben, an animator.
You know, one of the greatest things about this podcast is that we get to talk to some extremely talented people.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I know maybe one or two areas of art, but there are some people who have just done, it seems like everything.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and that's what we get into in this podcast. So I knew that our guest, Hannah Patrico, was an amazing character designer and 3D modeler. But what we really get into in this podcast is her long-term goals of becoming a director in the animation industry, as well as starting her own studio.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's no secret that women haven't had the opportunities that men have had in the animation industry. And it's such a bummer when you have someone like Hannah who has done so many different art projects, who has so many skills, and who is always about learning and growing, just being shut out. And so it's so refreshing to hear someone who has a goal to really break new ground, to push the boundaries not only of storytelling, but of the social structures within the industry.
And with that, this is our interview. Well, I guess my interview, because you weren't there, with Hannah Patrico. Well, welcome everybody to the Up and Coming Artist Podcast. If Christian and future me didn't already talk about who we're going to have on today, my quick, way too short bio that I'll need some more on for our artist today is a character designer and modeler, so aka a 2D artist and a 3D artist in the field of animation. And she is Hannah Patrico.
Hey.
Welcome to the podcast. Or actually, thanks for welcoming me into your house.
No, thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
I'm really excited, also a little nervous, but we've already talked about that.
So, my short, probably way too short definition of you doesn't encompass all that you do in art. So could you just for a quick second give us a little bit more on what you do?
So I'm interested in 2D animation and 3D animation. I have dabbled in stop motion and character puppet making for stop motion puppets. I also do oil painting. I've done pastels. I've done watercolor. I did metal pouring on campus, which was super cool. I took a sculpture class. Yeah, that was awesome.
That's awesome.
I took about 3 years worth of ceramics classes. I've basically done everything that we teach at Cal State Fullerton except for glass blowing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So how was ceramics for you? Because I took one semester and it nearly killed me.
Yeah.
So obviously you enjoyed it. So what is it about ceramics that you enjoyed?
I enjoy feeling the material with my hands. I do that. I actually paint with my hands a lot sometimes when I'm doing oil paints, which is really bad because a lot of oil paints have a lot of mercury in them. So it's super toxic. I'm convinced my first child will have 3 eyes. It's okay though. But yeah, so I really enjoyed ceramics because I enjoy I always enjoyed Legos and I enjoyed building things and I enjoy actually being able to see something in the round, which I think is why I like 3D animation so much too, is because it's sort of the same thing. ZBrush instantly clicked with me. It was night and day. I loved it.
Yeah, and for those listening at home, that's a 3D sculpting program.
Yeah, so it's a 3D sculpting program where basically it's using clay on the computer to sculpt a 3D figure or object or whatever you want, and you just push and pull it like you're using clay in real life. So I feel like my ceramics classes, because I took all of those before I took our ZBrush class at school, really helped me with that. Yeah,
that's awesome. So, and I do want to get more into that because you have done so much stuff. But I think I forgot. I didn't finish up your bio completely because you're also a lover of Pulp Fiction and a hater of bananas.
Yeah. No, okay, so I hate bananas for one very specific reason.
Yeah, I need to hear this.
Okay, so I don't know how old I was. This story is notorious in my family, and my whole family knows I hate bananas because of this. I was probably I couldn't have been older than maybe 6. And so my mom's mom, my grandmother, was driving me one day. And I had been at her house. I had a banana for breakfast, and she was like a crazy driver, and I got super car sick, and I puked. I puked up like my banana. And so since that day, like, my brain cannot disconnect like
that feeling,
that banana puke taste in my mouth with a banana. So I hate the smell of bananas, I hate the taste of bananas, I hate the texture of bananas. It's really bad.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. It's funny that it's like so specific.
Well, it's really funny because it happened again with the same grandmother in the same car, but I puked up Cheez-Its. But this was back when like Nickelodeon, was it Nickelodeon that made Cat Dog?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they had Cat Dog Cheez-Its. Oh. And so I puked those up, and so as a little kid, I thought they were different than regular Cheez-Its, so I would never eat Cat Dog Cheez-Its ever again. And it wasn't until I got...
lasted
yeah.
like a short season.
Yeah. So it's like I took an evolutionary anthropology class at Cal State Fullerton, and like we learned about how when something happens to you and like you won't eat that again, it's like a primal reaction. Because your brain thinks that that's toxic or poisonous, so it teaches you to never eat it again. Mm-hmm. But in reality, it was just my grandmother's crazy driving.
That story is better than I hoped it was going to be.
I had a bad experience with the banana, okay? Like,
that's so funny. So, this is a total different transition, but since we're talking about Cal State Fullerton, I was remembering... I don't remember exactly. Maybe I do the first time we met, but I remember the conversation. It was something like this. I was like, "Hi, I'm Ben," and you're like, "Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm going to be the owner of my own studio." And then that was it. So from the get-go, I was like, "Okay, this is someone who's like super ambitious about their goals, but then also works super hard to like get to those goals," which I think is cool. Like hearing all the classes that you took, like even doing that metal work, that's like all working toward you. Well, I mean, I don't know what your studio is going to be, but like growing you as an artist, which I think is super cool.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I always joke around and say like short-term goal, work for Pixar and get an Oscar, and then long-term goal, own my own studio. But that's sort of how like I'm approaching things. Like I know that like working for Pixar is like any animator's dream, but I'd love to work for like some major studio at some point. I want to get into directing. And so I'd love to direct a film, and I'd love to win an Oscar for an animated film. Because I just think, like, while the Oscars have, like, their own controversies and stuff like that, like, I've always admired most of the animated films that have won. And I feel like it'd be really cool because we don't have many female directors in the animation industry, period. And then also... there's only been like 1 or 2 female directors that have won the Best Animated Feature Award. Yeah. And Brenda Chapman was I think she was the first, and she won it for Brave.
Yeah. And so she also kind of got...
which she sort of also got gypped on because of like that whole controversy. Yeah. Yeah, and so I feel like it's really important, and I feel like while like my own successes shouldn't be measured by something like the Oscars, like I feel like it would just like be like a defining moment for me. Yeah. Like, yes, I am actually good at this. Yeah. Because like, you know, like we all sort of talk about like, I think it's called imposter syndrome, where it's like you have that person in your head that's always like, you're awful at what you do. And so I feel like being acknowledged by any award would be like huge for any of us. Like if you win like even acknowledgement at like a festival, or having your film win something on campus, or getting your short film featured in like the Disney short films collection, or like something like that. Like those are always major like landmarks in like our careers. Yeah. And I just feel like, especially for me, I've always really struggled with like imposter like syndrome. And so I feel like it'd just be like a major defining moment for me. And then also I have a deal with my dad because they support me so much with my career choice and like my major choice, but my parents both really wanted me to pursue sciences in high school. And I finally like put my foot down. I was like, no. I was like, I want to be happy with what I do for the rest of my life. I want to study animation. And they were like, okay, that's fine. And so my dad, every time I see him, he's like, how's coloring going? Because he just like says I color for school. But we have a deal where whichever film I make that gets an Oscar, he has to get a tattoo of the main character.
Might I ask where?
I'm gonna make sure it's like a tramp stamp with like little swirls and like stars around it. And my dad's a lawyer, so it would be great.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, Andy's a lawyer, so you gotta hold him to it. He knows.
Exactly, he knows. The whole family is in on this deal. Yeah.
You're like, I've survived Grandma's driving. I'm gonna survive to the Oscars. Like,
exactly.
Well, Well, that's awesome. And I think that's cool that you have a specific goal in mind, because I think sometimes I've gone to art kind of vague, and that doesn't help. But having that direction like you do, and then even like in our first conversation, that I'm going to start my own studio. There's no doubt in your mind that you're going to do that, and I have no doubt that you're going to do that.
Thanks.
So what I'm getting to with that is, when did that idea about, directing and wanting to win an Oscar for it kind of come into your mind?
I think it goes back to my high school experience. I went to a small all-girls Catholic high school in San Diego, and every year there's this contest that they have where each class puts together, writes, and directs a 20-minute musical using like modern songs.
That's so cool.
And it's called Spring Sing. And so there's like an overarching theme, and then each class has a sub-theme, and you choreograph, you sing, you dance, the whole 9 yards of like a musical in 20 minutes. And my freshman year, I was selected by the teachers to be a director. So there were 2 directors for the freshman class, and I was one of them. And so that was sort of a moment when I realized, like, I have leadership skills and, like, I really wanted to utilize them. Mm-hmm. And so then in high school, I went on to be a stage manager for a theater team, for our theater troupe. I did some acting. I'm an okay actor. And
you just have too many talents.
Yeah. Too many talents. I'm so talented. And then when I got to my senior year of high school, it was, like, sometime in sophomore year when it clicked that, like, going to school for animation is a thing. Like, that's actually a thing. It just never clicked with me before that, like, that's something you can study. I had still been sort of dabbling in the idea of being a marine biologist. I love science. I think it's super fun, and I love marine life, so I thought it would have been fun to do that. But then by the time I got to my senior year of high school, I realized that I wanted to study animation, and I've always done a lot of writing throughout high school. Like, I was that one kid that was always, like, writing things, and I was always, like, typing on my computer.
Smart kids.
Smart kids. And so I always enjoyed writing, and I love film. And so just the idea of directing something that was, like, sort of like my animation baby always seemed really exciting. And so when I was in high school, I was also on speech team, and I did a speech for the Optimist Club in San Diego, and it was, like, something about, like, what helps drive your optimism in life. I can't remember what the exact prompt was, but I talked about how the dream of working at Pixar one day and the idea of being a director and receiving an Academy Award for a film that I did is what makes me optimistic about my future. Because it's like, while it's a really big goal and it's a really far goal, it's still tangible to me, and I feel like I can reach in. Like, there's enough open space for me to take, like, all the highs and lows of life that are going to come on my way to get there, because I can't plan out every step along the way, as we all know. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it kind of goes back a little bit.
Yeah. So would you say, is that when you also got into art in general?
When I was in 3rd grade, I had this horrible art teacher. She would... Okay, it wasn't like one of those art classes that, like, they give little kids where it's like, oh, you're just gonna make a pretty drawing. It was like she'd make a drawing of, like, something in a specific way, and then she would just yell at us how to do it.
Oh,
like,
gosh.
Be like, first you're gonna do this, and don't do anything else until I tell you to. And it was awful, and I hated it. And so my mom volunteered one day at school to help out with the art class, and she saw how much I hated it. And, like, my family already knew at that point that, like, I had a talent when it came to drawing, because I would sit there with, like, you remember those, like, little mini Pokemon Pokedexes that you could buy? I used to sit there with them and, like, draw the Pokemon just by looking at them. I just copy, like, the line work. And then, like, I'd take, like, covers of, like, my books and try to duplicate them and stuff like that. So they knew I had a gift for it. So my mom enrolled me in art classes outside of school. And I started with pastels. I was in 3rd grade. And then we went up to watercolor. And then by the time I was 10, I was oil painting. Wow. And I was oil painting when I started 5th grade.
10? Oh my gosh.
So I've been oil painting for, like, almost 14 years now.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
I think I was just, like, picking my nose when I was 10.
I've been doing art for a while, but my mom told me when I got to high school, because I'd been doing art for a while, she was like, listen, she's like, you're going to be taking a lot of classes and you might already know some of that stuff. And she's like, but go into that class pretending you know nothing, because you'll learn something.
Yeah.
And so I've always approached every art class like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And that's cool too. Like, you were talking about the classes you've taken at Cal State Fullerton, like the breadth at which you've gone in art, like in almost every different area that there is at the school, and probably that there is, period. Yeah. So that's awesome. That's super cool. And I was looking on your Meet the Artist page that you did for some class or something, and you mentioned some influences that you had, like Greg Simpkins, for example. And let's see, other ones that you had. I didn't know the pronunciation. I've read these guys' names before. Obviously, there's Fabio Moon, Gabriel Ba. Were you reading Day Tripper or Two Brothers? Or...
I read Day Tripper. I read Two Brothers. I read How to Talk to Girls at Parties.
They wrote that?
Neil Gaiman wrote it, and then they did a graphic novel for it. Yeah. And then it's being turned into like a movie, I think.
Oh my gosh. I almost got that book last year.
It's really good. It's really good. And then I also, the way I got introduced to Gabriel Ba and Fabio Moon, though, was through the Umbrella Academy. It's Gerard Way's graphic novel. And Gerard Way's the lead singer of My Chemical Romance. I was like an emo kid in high school. So, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting, too, I mean, you mentioned Van Gogh on that list, Salvador Dali, Andy Warhol, and particularly the last two, slightly more graphic artists. I guess Dali's illustrative. But Greg Simpkins is like, as if I remember his work correctly, it's like very illustrative, very well rendered, kind of like super imaginary, like birds flying and crazy stuff like that. What do you think it was about those artists that drew you to them? Like, obviously, you had Day Tripper, but what about the other guys?
I think it's their ingenuity. Like, especially when you look at, like, Greg Simpkins or Van Gogh or Warhol or Dali, they're all known for, like, really iconic styles. And I feel like having a style is something I've always struggled with, because while I started doing art really young, the way that my art teacher taught us was by duplication. So when I started oil painting, it was still lifes first in black and white, and then still lifes in color. And then the next step was master duplications. She would literally be like, okay, go to the books and like pick a book that you like, and then pick a painting that you like, and you're going to duplicate that. So like I duplicated like Mayonnaise and Monet's, and then like Degas, and then like I did an Edward Hopper. So I knew how to paint in all these different styles. And I was always taught to only draw from life, not to draw from like pure imagination. And so I feel like I really struggle with the style. And so all these artists that I really like, they have such iconic styles that they came up with on their own. And I just think that's so cool. And it's something I want to find my own style. So I'm still trying to. Everybody says I have like a Disney style. And that's sort of like, I respect like Disney movies and I love Disney movies so much, but it sort of like makes me grind my teeth a little bit, because I'm like, I don't want to have a Disney style. I want to have my Hannah style. Like, I want somebody to look at my work and be like, oh, that's really cool. I've never seen somebody draw like that.
That's cool.
Like Jake Lemke. His style is awesome. I've never seen anybody draw like that.
Yeah, and I've been trying to get him on the podcast since it started.
He needs to be on the podcast.
Yeah, just like, here, we got to stop right now. Oh, I'll edit this part. Yeah. And just be like, Jake, you need to come on the podcast. I'm calling you out.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah. I mean, he needs to be.
And I do want to talk more about this later, but since we're talking about it now, what is something that you'd want that Hannah style to be?
I think I'm still sort of figuring that out. I really like really graphic comics and like cartoons. Like, while I really admire like Gravity Falls and Adventure Time, they all have like sort of like this really squishy sort of round feeling to them, or like Steven Universe has a really squishy round feeling. But I think also part of the reason why I like Greg Simpkins and then like Gabriel Ba and Fabio Moon is that they use this very graphic illustrative style in which they work, where it's like very sharp edges, like sharp features. And so like I struggle though when I draw like female characters, because I always want to give them like these sharp cheekbones and these sharp jawlines and these sharp noses, and then they look like a dude. And it's like, okay, that's cool, but I'm trying to make a feminine person here. So I'm still working on figuring out my own style. I think everybody is, especially at our age. But I just want to make something new and something exciting where people look at it and go, yeah, I want to see more of that.
Yeah, and that's cool. And I think the things that you're doing, I feel like, is what gets you there. You've gone into so many different areas and tried them, and you've looked at the past, too, to, like, these artists and, like, what they've done. So I think that's super cool. That makes me want to kind of transition to, you were saying it was in high school where animation came into the mix. But when was it that you were like, oh, character design and 3D modeling is something I really enjoy?
I think it was my second year at Cal State Fullerton, so last year, I took animation, the 355. So it's like an open animation class, and there's 2 different sections of it. Either you take it with Andy Fedak, and you take character modeling and like environmental design and stuff like that, or you take it with Frederick Vang, and that's rigging. And so I took it with Andy Fedak, and that's when I really got into it. I always have sort of been doodling like my own characters, like all of us artists do. But then ZBrush was incredible, and I loved it. And I love the idea of explaining a story through just one person, because you can look at, even like when you people watch, you can look at one person and like come up with a whole story about them just based on like how they're dressed or how they walk. And
Right.
I just think that's really important. And so I really enjoyed that class, and that sort of made me decide like, this is what I want to do. Like, this is the most exciting part of animation for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So then thinking about that, how does 3D modeling, or if it does, differ from character design?
Well, character design I think is typically a 2D thing. Like, you're drawing out the character, you're drawing out facial expressions, you're drawing turnarounds where you're seeing the character from every angle to get an idea of proportions and costume and things like that. And then character design also has a written element to it, where you're writing down like character traits and like describing like how they would walk or how they would move or their backstory. And then 3D modeling is taking those 2D drawings and elements and putting them into like a 3D form that you can animate and move and make talk and make a story from.
Yeah.
So I think that they like go hand in hand with one another, but they're also 2 separate things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, totally, yeah. I was thinking about, because you're talking about new styles.
Yeah.
And since you were talking about the Disney style, I think, and probably because of Pixar and how great their movies are, and, you know, and then Disney being its parent company now at this point, I think in animation, this is going to be a statement, I'll transition it into a question. A lot of the trends, at least this is just an opinion, this is my opinion, that CG all kind of looks the same in terms of characters. And do you feel that it's because of the success? Like, you're talking about how Pixar super inspires you and how their movies are typically winning the Oscars. Is it because of that? Or is it because of the limitations of technology? Or do you think it's just that's the style that's hip right now, just like Steven Universe is for 2D and TV?
I think it has a lot to do with the success. And then also, if you look at the people who are directing films right now at Disney and Pixar and DreamWorks, where we're seeing the same facial structures for women, similar features for men, it has a lot to do with the fact that most of these artists went to schools like CalArts, where CalArts was predominantly the only school where you could learn animation back in the day. And CalArts is amazing, don't get me wrong. They've put out thousands and thousands of incredibly successful artists in their time. But now we have so many different schools in so many parts of the world that teach animation. And these people come from different areas, though. And so they have different exposure to different types of media. And then each person has their own interests. Whereas before, CalArts was founded by Walt Disney, and so it was literally designed to pump out animators for his studio. You were taught to draw in a specific style, you're taught to model in a specific style, and so they just keep seeing the same type of work coming out. But now we have, like, Cal State Fullerton. There's, which school is that? Channel Islands also has an animation program. And then you have schools on the East Coast, you have schools in Canada, you have schools everywhere around the world for animation now. And so I think that with that, and then the amount of exposure we have to world media and like art from around the world, I think now we're going to start to see a change in styles, because I think it's important that we sort of push our styles to change. And I feel like we're starting to see that a little bit with some characters. Like, I think Moana was pretty successful in like sort of starting to push a little bit to change the style. She still had the same like round face, but they really pushed some of the characters to have the body structures and the facial features and the design of a true like Polynesian like person, which I thought was really cool to see that. But I'd like to see it change. And I feel like now that we have like a new generation of animators coming into the scene with great dreams and like great inspiration from like Asian cultures and then like Europe and Africa and like all these different parts of the world, we're going to start to see some really cool influences, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it totally did.
Yeah.
And I think it's cool too, like, This is just my opinion now, but I think it's cool that you've gone into so many different areas of art, because I feel like that's a really good way to really find that new thing, like I'd already said about your style. But seeing that in animation, I think is really cool. And then, and of course, like, I mean, right before this, we were talking about Into the Spider-Verse, which at the time we're recording this just came out. This will be old news by the time this comes out. But they're kind of doing that too, and I won't say anymore because I know you haven't seen it. So now I want to transition to, so you were high school, super big ambitions and dreams, and then that transition to Cal State Fullerton. Like, how did that come about? Were you just like researching animation and they had it, or how did that come about?
So my college career has been a little chaotic. So I went to an all-girls Catholic high school. It was more so like a college preparatory high school because they were hardcore academically, like more hardcore than anything at Cal State Fullerton. Probably comparable. Like, we were probably like the Ivy League of high schools. Like, it was intense. Like, my first year of high school, I was pulling all-nighters all the time to finish homework. And it wasn't that I had bad time management skills, like maybe a little bit at the time, but it was also just the amount of work we were doing. And so when I graduated high school, I actually applied to 11 colleges. I got into 6 of the 11, and I got scholarships from 5 of the 6.
Wow.
And so I actually got a scholarship from my top school. I wanted to go to Fairleigh Dickinson University in New Jersey. It's this little tiny school. They did have an animation program. I graduated in 2013 from high school. So it was the same year as the Boston Marathon bombing.
Oh.
And I had, like, major anxiety. I also had, like, not the greatest high school experience. So mentally and emotionally, I wasn't stable enough to go away from home and be away from home when I had, like, a lot of, like, stuff I needed to work out. And then I think that was just, like, the tip of the iceberg. It was just like, okay, forget this. I'm done. And so I withdrew my acceptance, and I actually had gotten into San Diego State. And so my backup major was to be an English major.
Because you were writing all the time back then.
Yeah, and I love English. I was amazing in those classes. I can, like, whip out, like, an 8-page paper the night before, and then give a speech on it, and do a musical on it. Like, I can do all of it. And so I went to orientation at San Diego State, and I hated every minute of it.
Aww.
I was not happy. I was like, I do not want to be an English major. Like, I'm not going to go to college for 4 years, then just realize I'm unhappy with my major, then I have to go back to grad school to get a major in something else that I should have gotten it in originally. And so my dad went to orientation with me because there was, like, the parents' orientation.
Yeah.
And so I got in the car, and my dad was like, how do you feel? And I just, like, broke down. I was like, I don't want to go here. And he was like, okay. He's like, well, we'll talk about it. And so the next day, my family and I flew to Hawaii for vacation. That was, like, we had that trip booked.
Yeah.
So it was like, we can't not go because I don't want to go to college. And so the whole way there, we had, like, talked about it. While we were there, we talked about it. And I basically ended up calling up San Diego State while I was in Hawaii. And I was like, how do I withdraw my acceptance? How do I back out? Like, what do I do? And they were like, okay, this is what you do. But I couldn't transfer to another school because I technically enrolled.
Yeah.
So I went to community college for 3 years. And while I was there, I actually applied to CalArts 3 times. And I was denied acceptance all 3 times.
Oh.
But I was in San Diego, and San Diego is incredible, and I love it, and I miss it so much. But as far as, like, animation and film goes, there's nothing out there except for Sony. That's it. And, like, Sony's great.
Yeah.
But
do they have a branch out there?
They have an office out there, and they do, like, mostly, I want to say quality testing out there.
Got it.
And then PlayStation has an office out there.
Yeah, okay, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, and so there's not really much out there for, like, art and animation. I took one animation class at my community college, but it was using 3ds Max.
Nice.
Which, like, nobody really uses anymore.
Yeah, because of Maya.
Because of Maya. Yeah. And so my teacher worked for the military using 3ds Max to create simulators for the Air Force.
Oh, that's pretty
And so
cool.
that's where he had his background. So that was my first exposure. And then I applied to Cal State Long Beach and Cal State Fullerton. And I got into Cal State Fullerton, like, literally the night after I applied, they were like, "You're in," and I was like, "Okay, cool."
Yeah.
But Cal State Long Beach was actually my top choice, and so I got into the university, but I didn't get into the BFA major. So I was like, "Cal State Fullerton, it is. Don't know where you are, but let's go." So yeah,
That's crazy.
So it's a little bit of a roundabout journey, but I'm a firm believer of everything happens for a reason. Like my first day of my first class at community college, I met one of my best friends now. And then I've met so many amazing people at Cal State Fullerton that I like truly believe I was like meant to meet.
Yeah.
So I know it all happened for a reason, and I've grown a lot as a person like since high school. And so like the person I was when I graduated high school and the person I am now are very, very different people. And I'm like really thankful for that though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah, then we wouldn't have met.
We wouldn't have met. I wouldn't be sitting here for a podcast.
And I wouldn't be in your house unless I was a creep. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
So, came to Cal State Fullerton. You had the time at community college. I did the same thing.
Yeah.
So then you were coming in with some art classes that because you'd taken them at community college?
Yeah.
So had you taken like life drawing already or?
Yeah, so I had taken life drawing. It was called figure drawing at my community college. So I think when they transferred it over, it didn't transfer right.
Oh.
But basically what ended up happening was I transferred over. I had already taken, like, I took ceramics in high school. I took painting in high school. I took drawing in high school. And then I also took AP art in high school. So I had, like, AP art credit. And then when I went to community college, I took sculpture, life drawing. I took a painting class. I took drawing 1 again. And then I had my animation class. And then when I transferred over to Cal State Fullerton, they were like, we don't know if you can paint. And I was just like, okay. And they're like, we don't know if you can draw the figure. And I was like,
just give them that stare.
okay.
Yeah.
And so I ended up retaking painting again.
Oh.
And then I ended up taking figure drawing again, so I have double credits for those classes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but I didn't have to take drawing because of my AP art.
Got it.
So that, like, voided that out, thank God. But yeah, so I had some experience with, like, everything except for, like, animation, really. Like, my animation was really crude. I think I have the video somewhere, but it's awful. And, like, I watched it, like, a year ago, and I was just like, oh my God. I was like, I can't believe I thought this was good.
I think all of us have stuff like that. And I feel like, at least for me, it'll always be that way, like, forever.
Oh yeah, of course. All of us do that, though.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Were you kind of bored when you came in then? Because you're like, I kind of already took these.
Yeah, because my first semester I was taking painting and figure drawing. And then, like, 2, like, GE classes. And so I was, like, really bored. And I was so upset because I was like, I want to take my animation classes, and I can't take my frickin' animation classes because the school says I don't know how to paint.
Yeah.
And I was
I've been doing this since I was 10.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, like, it was really frustrating. And I was just like, you know what? Whatever. I'll take the classes.
Yeah.
I approached both art classes like, you know what? Maybe I'll learn something. And you know what? I really needed the figure drawing class, so I'm glad I took that.
And that's what I was asking about figure drawing, because you're taking that, or you were taking that right now. You just picked up your portfolio today, so thanks for meeting with me despite your finals.
Yeah, of course. It's a nice break.
But you've been posting a lot on your Instagram about life drawing.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about that. 1, your experience, but also 2, like, what do you feel like you really learned throughout, like, whenever you took it back in community college up through now?
Yeah. Well, community college was the first time that I actually drew, like, from a figure, nonetheless a nude figure. So that was
shocking.
The first day of class, honestly, we were all like, this is going to be super awkward. And then the model came in, and there was, like, the quiet giggles, like, for the first day. And then something just clicks where you're just like, this is art.
Yep.
And you're just like, it doesn't matter. And I always joke around and say, like, somebody could run naked in front of me right now, and I'd be like, oh, nice pose. Like,
Just
let me draw you as you streak across. Like,
secondary action?
Yeah, exactly. And so, my art teacher, though, taught it a lot differently than the teachers I have now have taught it. And so I feel like I got a really good experience, like, taking that class, and I really enjoyed it, and it was good exposure. But then when I came to Cal State Fullerton, I had a little bit of a struggle the first semester of taking figure drawing, because it was a totally different way than I was taught previously. And then I took 117 at Cal State Fullerton, which is like figure drawing 1. And then I took 217, which is life drawing for animation, which I took that with Brian Kennan, and that class like totally flipped me on my head. I was so frustrated because gestures were never my strong suit. I always hated them, but I was really good at doing the long poses. But Brian's class is 99% gestures, and then like the last like 2 weeks you do like 2 long poses.
Yeah, which is funny because the dude seems like he just woke up and like he doesn't seem like he's gonna do some gesture drawing.
Yeah, but his gestures are incredible.
They're very good. Yes,
he's
very good.
An incredible artist, and so I really struggled, but my art changed so much in that class. And then I now have, or I just finished 317A, which is figure drawing whatever, with Joe Forkin. I don't know what the
like
actual name
intermediate
is.
Or,
yeah, it's like life drawing whatever. But and I really enjoyed it. I hadn't had a figure drawing in almost a year, figure drawing class in almost a year. So it was a little rough getting back into it, but I love figure drawing so much. I'm so sad that this is like my last figure drawing class that I have to take.
You could keep going.
I would, but my semester, like next semester, is pretty packed already, so I won't be able to. But Joe said I can just pop in whenever, so I'm going to do that.
Awesome.
But yeah, and I've learned so much, and it really changes how you draw. I don't know if you noticed ever, like when you took a figure drawing class, like how much your drawing changed. But this time with Joe, I learned so much more about how to draw the body in a way where it makes sense. Instead of just drawing what you see, draw what makes sense. And like he said something really interesting, like our last day of drawing, and he was like, just regurgitating data isn't interesting. Your job as an artist is to make the data interesting. And so he's like, if you just draw what you see, he's like, you're like, okay, cool, she knows how to draw a hand, like that's great. But if you make it interesting, he's like, people are going to enjoy that more. That he's like, that's your job as an artist, is to make the data interesting for people to look at. And so it was my first time also working in color in a really long time. Because
just pastel color in there, right?
Yeah, he did pastel color, and so that was my first time using pastels since I was like 9.
At least you used some before, and then there's people like me when I took it.
Yeah, and so it was really crazy getting back into pastels, because my hands are like 2 times the size that they were when they were 9. So smudging with my fingers, I would like smudge, and then I'd lift up my hand and be like, the whole drawing was smudged. And then he really pushed me to push my color how I wanted to. Like, I've always been really intrigued by artists that use, like, color temperature in, like, a really odd sort of provoking way. Like, I really like, blues and greens to be, like, your cool tones, and then, like, reds and oranges and yellows to be in, like, your highlight areas. And I've always wanted to do that, but I never really knew quite how, and I feel like it just totally clicked, finally, with him. And he's an incredible teacher. Like, I would highly recommend him as a teacher to anybody. Yeah,
he's awesome. Yeah. And then, so thinking about what we were talking about earlier with your ambitions and goals and how this is all getting you there, how does life drawing help with animation?
Well, life drawing is really important, as most animators will acknowledge, and it has to do with the fact that when you're animating, you have like key poses you need to look at for a movement, and it's like, how does somebody pick up a cup of water? Like, they don't just pick it up. Like, there's like sometimes a certain way that they move their arm or their wrist, or the way that they pick it up, they might arch it out more or bring it into their body more before they pick it up. And there's certain ways that you have to like know how the body works too. Anatomy is incredibly important to animators, even though like the anatomy of a cartoon character is very exaggerated and sometimes they don't have defined joints. It's still really important to know how the body works, because you can easily break somebody's spine on accident, like animating them. And so figure drawing is really important for animators, because you need to know how the body works, you need to know how proportions work, and then when you get really good at doing like your quick gesture drawings, you can easily make like a quick gesture of like something from your head, like, oh, what would that movement look like? And then animate something, because you can understand like, this is how an elbow works, this is how an ankle works, this is how far the rib cage can extend. Like, it's really important, and I wish that more students would realize how important it is. I feel like sometimes figure drawing gets looked at like, I don't want to do this because, or I'm an animator, I don't need to know how to draw, like, or I don't need to know how to draw the figure because I'm animating like this robot, or I'm animating this character that's like 17 feet tall and has like 2-inch arms. Like, and there's like And it's really important. And when you
Yeah.
follow, like, Disney animators, for example, like, they're constantly posting figure drawing stuff. Constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, I think it's, like, Steven Thompson on Instagram.
Yeah.
He constantly posts figure drawing stuff, and it's so incredible. And it's, like, we go out sometimes and do figure drawing, like, cafe sketching. That's important, too.
And you were talking about with Joe making things appealing. Mm-hmm. So how can, and kind of transitioning into character design, how do you do that? How do you even go about making something appealing versus just drawing the Pokemon how you see it on the Pokédex, right?
Well, I think what makes things interesting are the details, but then also you don't want the details to be the only thing that makes something interesting. You want the overall design of a character to be interesting. Like, what's a good character we could talk about? Okay, like Rey from The Force Awakens. She has a really interesting design to her character. Like, her hair is in an interesting, like, triple ponytail thing. And then, like, her costume, the drapery is really beautiful. And then, like, her character, like, the backstory is intriguing. You don't know who her family is. You don't know where she came from. She can't remember things. Like, that's always interesting. When somebody can't remember something, people instantly become more interested for some reason. I don't know what it is.
We love idiots. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
But then, like, when you look at Rey's backstory or her character more up close, like, the clothes that she's wearing, they're dirty, they're torn. Like, that's an interesting detail, and it's because she lives by herself. She's poor. She is a scavenger. And then, like, she has that massive staff, which she probably made herself because she's a scavenger, and she is able to fight people off with it and defend herself. But then we also know she speaks other languages because in The Force Awakens, you see her yelling at another alien for trying to steal BB-8. And so there's all those interesting details, and that's what pulls somebody in when you can make a character relatable, and then B, make them seem real. That's like what's so important, and it really grounds these fictional characters in our world.
That's super good, and it's cool to see how you've analyzed that, right? Even if you're just spitballing it for Ray right now.
Yeah.
No, that's all super important. The fact that you're taking that time to think about it, and that's, I mean, you know, and that's what life drawing is too. You have to know that stuff. So, I want to talk about, as much easy transition into, you were just in production, or you still are at school because you're in your finals week. Yeah. And so in that class, you're making a film.
Yeah.
So what is that film about?
To sum it up in as few sentences as possible, my film's about this old man. He's a fisherman. His wife died many years ago when they were young. And he goes out in the water every, like, night to do his fishing. And this one night, he happens across a mermaid that looks just like his deceased wife. And she ends up being a siren that actually shapeshifts and ends up killing him.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so I'm really into, like, emotions and, like, the play of emotions and, like, how that works out. I find that to be really interesting. And, like,
you like messing with old people.
I like messing with old people. What can I say?
Revenge on your
Revenge
grandma.
on my grandmother. Yeah. But yes, I enjoyed the pre-production aspect. If anything, I have learned just how much I hate animating. Which is weird because I'm an animation student. But no.
Who's going to win an Oscar?
Who's going to win an Oscar nonetheless.
But for directing.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's not that I hate animating. I haven't had enough experience with animating, I feel like, to have successfully made this film. And so that's really frustrating because I took intro to animation or whatever. It's called the 253 class, and I was traditional pencil to paper animation with Brian Kennan, which was a great class because I learned all the traditional basics you need to know, like drag, follow through, secondary action, like how to make things move correctly, how to do a ball bounce, things like that. And then I took 255 with Andy Fedak, which was intro to 3D animation. Modeling mostly. And so I modeled a car, I modeled an environment, and then he was like, okay, great, now animate said car and environment. And I had no idea how to animate in 3D. So it was really hard. It was really frustrating. And then you take pre-production where you create all the assets you need to make a film. So you do all your storyboarding, all of your character design. You do like animation tests, story writing. It's a lot of work. It's an insane amount of work. And then you take production and you're expected to animate that film when some of us only have like 1 or 2 classes of actual animation under our belt. And so the scenes that I animated at the beginning semester, I hate. I hate them so much because they're so bad. And then
you
the
learned
scenes,
a lot, right?
Because I've learned so much about animation. And so it's really frustrating. I work like 25 to 35 hours a week. And then I have 3 other art classes and production. And it's just like, it's a lot of work. And I've learned a lot about animating, even though I don't want to do animating. And I feel like it's important. I took the class, though, even though, like, in the end, I want to be a character designer and modeler and a director because I understand the logistics, I think, more of animating a film. And then, like, I took rigging, so I would understand how to rig because as a character designer and or modeler, I think it's important to know that. Like, what are the limitations of these programs and what can they do to move a character?
Right.
Because if you create, like, this awesome looking, like, supervillain that has these giant spikes coming out of his shoulders and, like, it looks super cool, but then the rigger's going to be like, yeah, you can't do that, but you don't understand why. That's really frustrating, A, for the rigger, and B, for you as the modeler. But then if you are modeling a character and you're just like, oh yeah, if I put these spikes in his shoulder, they're going to stab him in the head every time he moves his arm up. I shouldn't do that. You save A, the rigger, a talk with you, and B, you the frustration of having to redo something. So it was an important experience, production. I am more than ready to be done with it. But I'll post like snippets on my Instagram and that's about it.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not super proud of it.
Aw. Well, I still want to see it. That's awesome.
You'll see it. I'll show you. Only you, Ben.
Awesome. I feel so good right now.
You should feel lucky.
Yes. Well, and I think that's cool too, what you're saying about kind of your directorial standpoint. Like, you need to know all these different areas of the production. So that way, when you're the head of it, you can communicate with everybody.
Yeah.
And you also know how it's going to go down and how you can help everybody out, even though you're the head.
Yeah.
Which I think is super important and super cool. Along those lines, what do you say that production has taught you the most, both as the animator, because we were just talking about harmony, but also as the director?
I think it's definitely taught me I don't know how to animate.
I'll be the judge of that.
I'll show you what I have later, like so far. But I think animating production really made me realize how little we pay attention to like everyday things that we do. Like sitting up, like you don't think about it. You don't think about like when you're laying down in bed, how am I going to sit up today? You just do it. There's so many actions that our bodies just do without us really thinking about it. It's all subconscious processing. Like you can really sit there and think about it if you want to, but it's a massive waste of brain space if you ask me. But it's really tricky because when you go animate something, you'll animate it how you think it goes, and then you watch it and you're just like, that's not at all how that person's supposed to move. And you have to actually sit there and think about it. Like you'll see animation students sitting in the labs and like making facial expressions, trying to figure out how their face moves, or like moving their arm like a certain way, and you're just like looking at them like, are they okay? And it's just like, no, we're just trying to think this out. Or like somebody like Alex and Rudy, two of my friends, will constantly be like in the labs, and then Alex will go up to Rudy and be like, hey, can you film me doing this thing so I have reference? And so I think I definitely learned like how much more I need to pay attention to like things that people do, and how much more drawing I need to do, like, on my day-to-day life, because I definitely don't do enough of it, and I feel like that would definitely benefit me. And then as far as directing goes, I feel like production was a really great opportunity for me to see how other people work and how to sort of engage other people, because even though we all speak the same animation talk, like follow through, secondary action, drag, whatever, X, Y, and Z, or like talking about Maya, like, oh, like extrude that face or whatever. Not everybody still talks the same way. Like not everybody understands things the same way. And so when we would do our group critiques and we'd be talking to somebody, we'd be like, oh yeah, do this. And they'd just be like, what the heck do you mean? And we'd have to either act it out or explain it or draw it. And there's so many different ways that people learn. And so I think that's really important, like as a director, like moving forward to know. Next semester, I'm taking the group projects class. So it was really beneficial for me to get the experience I did in production, seeing how the pipeline goes, but then also be interacting with other students and trying to get through to everybody.
Yeah, that's super good. I think that's cool, like, seeing you as the artist doing all these different things through high school, even way back when you were 10, and all this stuff, but then also branching yourself kind of on the other side of art, which is how do I direct people? How do I talk with people so that they understand what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. And then the third section, which is the sciences, which I have a quote from you, which says, and this is my transition into what you were about to get into there. You're talking about animation is the blend of the arts and sciences for me, allowing me to express my creativity and satisfy my never-ending desire to learn and explore new things. And that's the transition to your VR project.
Yeah. So at Cal State Fullerton, we have a 400 level class, and it's a graduate level class, and it is a group project class for animation students. And basically, like, there'll be like 2 or 3 groups, and there's directors for each group, and they come up with like a film or a video game or a movie or whatever it is they want to do, and they direct other students in making that. So this past summer, I took the VR class with Andy Fedak, and I absolutely loved it. And so actually, like, the first year I was at Cal State Fullerton and I took a class with Andy, he actually approached me about doing the group project class. He was like, you seem like somebody who'd be interested in that. Is that something you'd like to get into? And me knowing that I want to be a director, I was like, yes, please. And so,
you're like, have I mentioned that I've written musicals?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's sort of been in the works for a while. Not this project specifically, but the idea of me working on a group project. And so this summer, we started a VR video game project, sort of an escape room puzzle game. And so I'm super excited for it. We start production, I guess, if you want to call it that, in the spring semester. I'm co-directing it with Vicki Brown. She's a super, super talented artist.
Yeah, she's awesome.
And she is insane. She has a double major, I want to say, or a major and a minor.
Or like 3 majors.
I don't know. She's crazy, but she's studying animation and computer science. Mm-hmm. And so she's like more of like the techie technical side. She's actually she wants to be a technical artist. So somebody who does rigging and programming and script writing for the animation industry, versus how I want to be more on like the artistic, like development side where I'm doing character design, modeling, and directing. And so we work really well together because we both sort of talk the same way and then think the same way. Mm-hmm. But we both learn differently. She's more of like just tell me what you want and I will do it. Like X, Y, and Z, like do A, B, and then C, and I will give you D. And I'm more of like, just show me what you want, or like illustrate it for me. I'm more of a visual learner. She's more of like a technical learner.
Yeah.
And so it works well for both of us. So we're making a VR video game. It's called Escaping Argus. It's sort of this post-apocalyptic science fiction game, where basically, to give you a short synopsis, society's collapsed, all world governments formed into one, to like save Earth, and we're colonizing Mars now. And so in order to set the Martian colonies up for the best success, they're sending children, but then they're not just sending any children, they're sending only the smartest of the smartest. And so
like you and Vicky.
So like me and Vicky would be the only. And so there's this company called Argus, and they're responsible for testing children once they turn 12 years old to test their intelligence to see if they're smart enough to go to Mars. But Argus gets like really power crazy, and it turns into a eugenics project where basically if you're not smart enough to go to Mars, you're not smart enough to live.
Oh, wow.
And so
they didn't even get the option to go to Hogwarts or something?
No, you don't, unfortunately. Yeah, it's like life or death, like solve these puzzles, win this game, or you will die.
Yep.
And so
I'm dead.
Eugenics is something that is really interesting to me because we're sort of on the cusp of a time period in our life where eugenics is very, very close. And like eugenics is the idea of like determining like what makes somebody like worthy of living, but then also like the idea of manipulating our genes and our chromosomes in order to give us like ideal traits. It's sort of along the idea of the Holocaust, unfortunately. And so we're getting onto this like weird like ethical like line of our world history now where eventually one day this is going to become more cost efficient for everyday people are going to be able to do it. There's this really cool movie called Gattaca, and it's about eugenics and about like making designer babies and these superhuman babies that are literally perfect on every level, to the point where you can pick their eye color, their hair color, their IQ, like their heart rate, their like athletic abilities. And it's about how there are people who are normal in like this world where the movie takes place, and how they have dreams too, and how they don't have the same opportunities because they're not perfect. And so this game sort of touches on the idea of eugenics, but in the end, you're given the ability, if you play the game correctly and solve the puzzles, to escape from Argus and save other people from the company. So
that's cool.
It's a really intense project. It's going to be really heavy, but I am so excited for it. We're doing 4 levels of the game. It's going to be like, each room is going to be like a puzzle room. And so it's really exciting. Yeah,
that's crazy. I mean, Miss Ambition over here. No, that's super cool. So my next question would be, how are you even going about making that?
Yeah, so we're going to be using Unreal Engine. Andy Fedak, the teacher, taught it for the first time this last summer. He typically used Unity, but Unreal is so much more user-friendly. It has like, instead of having to code everything, it has pre-built-in batches of code called blueprints. So you can just like pop it in and like pop in a couple other lines of code and you have a game. So we're going to be using Unreal Engine for the game engine. And then we're going to be using Maya primarily for all the modeling. And then we will be using Substance Painter a little bit. So Substance Painter is a texturing program, allowing you to make different materials that you encounter in everyday life, because you can't go in and model all the grains of wood on a wooden table because that'll just eat away at your computer memory. Instead, you can project what looks like a texture of wood grain, so that way it looks like wood, but when in reality it's just like a picture of wood on there. So we'll be using Substance Painter to create the textures of the environment, and then Unreal Engine's really great because you do all the lighting in Unreal, so we don't have to worry about importing lights or anything like that. Basically how we're approaching it is these 4 to 5 levels of the game are to be like the first level really of the game, because eventually we want it to open up into like a bigger world space where you're interacting with this group that's called Prometheus, and they are the rebellion that's trying to overthrow Argus and stop what's going on, and trying to like save children and like stop people from dying. And so you are able to work with Prometheus, you're able to go back into Argus. There's going to be like these really interesting like world space and designs that we just don't have A, the money for, and B, the team for.
Or the time.
The time.
So it's going to be busy.
It is. So we're doing the first 4 levels, and then with each room, you're given like either a time limit or a certain number of tries in order to solve that puzzle. And if you don't win, you go down to this really dark room called the Redemption Room, and it's your last chance to say like, hey, I just messed up a little bit, give me another try, or else you die.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's going to be a frustrating game. I want it to be frustrating. Like, Cuphead is one of my favorite games. It's probably the most infuriating game I've played. Honestly, I can't play it for more than like 20 minutes at a time because it is so hard. It is so infuriating. You can recognize every pattern and still mess it up. And so I really wanted to sort of like make something that's hard to play, because I find that the people who aren't like fully immersed in like the instantly gratifying world that we live in are more capable of taking on challenges like a really hard video game. Like if I had my youngest brother who's 11 play Cuphead, he would totally not be into it, because all he plays right now are first person shooters and these games that are really, quite frankly, easy to play. They didn't have to play Majora's Mask a gazillion times in order to beat it, and didn't have like the webpage to go find a walkthrough for a level
save functions.
Save functions. You just had to play.
Yeah.
And so I think it'll be really fun. It's going to be challenging. But I'm really excited for it, and so is Vicky. So that's always a good feeling. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then people at school were excited after we pitched it. And I think it's really cool that Andy has brought VR to Cal State Fullerton, because VR is up and coming in the world, and the industry is still changing so much. And then we're starting to see things like AR starting to take hold. So it's going to be really cool seeing like what all of us end up doing with this. But Endgame, we would like to pitch it one day to a studio.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And that was actually kind of my next question is, just like everything you do, it's very ambitious.
Thanks.
but it's a video game.
Yeah.
Whereas your kind of main goal, at least from high school, was me at the Oscars.
Yeah.
Grabbing that Oscar for directing a film, presumably.
Yeah.
So, did the VR come in just because, I mean, it was fun and it was awesome and you had this cool puzzle box idea? Or is that just another area, another part of art that you want to explore?
I think it was really fun and exciting over the summer class. And then also, video games are so incredible nowadays. Like, not that they weren't incredible when we were a kid, but, you know, they're on, like, a whole nother level right now. And you have companies like Blizzard that are putting out incredible things for their video games. We're not talking only, like, the video games and the character designs and the gameplay, but then we're also talking about, like, their merchandising is pretty spot on. They have really great merch. And then also their cinematics.
Yeah.
They are incredible, like, movie quality feature length like things that they're doing, and like the quality of work that they're putting out, like, it's on a whole nother level. I'd like to pitch this video game to a studio one day. Whether or not that actually happens just depends on what happens after I graduate. But I do want to get into film still, like, definitely like the film industry for animation. I think it's such a cool, like, industry. And I think when you look at, like, a company like Blizzard, who's putting out these incredible cinematics for a video game that are basically movie industry quality animation and rendering, and their character designs are so incredible. We're gonna see, like, a lot of really cool stuff coming out soon.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's cool too, just like we were talking about earlier, how you've branched out into so many areas of art and you're branching into this one because a really good way to get into storytelling might even be through cinematics or through gameplay itself, like you're talking about with your VR game. I mean, that story is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
So I'm super excited to see that game when it comes out.
Thank you.
Just like your film, which you'll have to show me later, but whatever.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I want to get into now, and I think that's a perfect segue. You said it at the beginning, your long-term and short-term goals.
Yeah.
What would those be now, which I know we talked about kind of at the beginning, but just to reiterate, and then does VR and the things that you've been learning and talking about from Cal State Fullerton play into that in a new way, or just to flow into those original goals? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's a long question.
No, that makes sense. I think everything that I've learned at Cal State Fullerton has helped me grow to realize that, like, these goals that I've had in mind are, like, actually achievable. They're not just these far-fetched dreams that somebody has. So I graduate in May, and that's about all that I know I'm doing. It's really tricky because, you know, I mean, being a recent grad, like, getting into the industry can be really tough. We're entering an industry that's incredibly competitive with so many schools, like we talked about earlier, teaching animation. It's even more competitive now because you have kids from all around the world applying to the same places. So I'm totally down to work for smaller companies, totally down to do freelance work. So we'll see what happens. I don't have an internship. I applied to a couple studios for internships for next semester, but the problem is I'm not a returning student. So a lot of companies don't take seniors as interns. They only take juniors that are returning or seniors who are returning as interns. So I was sort of beating myself up about it for a while about not getting an internship, but honestly, I'm at the point where I don't mind if I don't get an internship because I have this video game project I'm going to work on. I want to give it, like, everything I've got. And I feel like as long as you never think that you know it all, then you're good. Like,
yeah. And that goes back to what you were talking about at the beginning, right? I think your mom was saying that to you when you started taking art classes. And I think that's cool to see that attitude, like, throughout your college experience, so that you're building in yourself. You're the Prometheus against the Argus right now.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that's cool, too, that instead of beating yourself up about it, instead you've taken that as kind of your, like, I don't know if calling card's the right word, but, like, I'm going to make myself better through this. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that artists do that more often. Because, like we talked about a little bit, the whole idea of, like, imposter syndrome with that person inside that always is beating you up and telling you you're not good enough. Like, there comes a certain point when I think as artists, we have to realize that there's always going to be somebody better, and there's always going to be somebody who's better at what you do, better at a specific thing, and that's okay, though. What's important is that you look at that person and want to learn. Like, what can I do to make myself better at that one skill? What can I do to understand that one thing better? And because if you stop learning, I think it like really stunts you as an artist, because yeah, you don't have to know like all gazillion digits of pi and the root of pi and the square root of that. And
Vicky probably does.
Vicky probably does, to be honest. But you don't need to know like every bone in the body, and you don't need to understand like Plato's theory on whatever. But you should always be striving to like learn new things about art and learn about other artists and learn about how other artists do art, because that's like the best way I think to inform your own art practice is like, wow, I really like how that person draws eyes. How do they do that? Like talk to them, look at videos of how they draw, or just practice drawing how they draw. And I think that's so important, and art's always changing. Yeah. So there's no way to ever know everything that you need to know, especially in the animation industry. There's no way to ever be an expert because Maya updates every year, and every year there's new things on it, and every year there's new bugs. Yeah. So there's never a way to like be an expert at art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool too, that that you've been taking those skills that you've been building since you were a kid and choosing to make them stronger instead of just riding off of that original skill that you have. And then two, kind of combining that with what your parents, I mean, this is going to sound weird, but wanted all along, because you're combining the arts and the sciences. Yeah. Like, and I don't know, to me that's really cool. And like we were talking about at the beginning, maybe that's how you're pushing yourself to make the Hannah style. And I think that's really awesome. So we talked about advice for students just now, and even you don't need to go to school. But what's something that people could learn from you about directing? What's something you've learned?
I think something that I've really learned about directing is that, like I sort of mentioned earlier, like everybody talks differently and everybody learns differently, even when we're talking about the same things. And I think that's important to keep that in mind. And then also, like, I really struggle with this, and I'm trying really hard to get better at it. Not to get frustrated so easily when somebody doesn't understand, because I'm trying to be a better director, so that way if I explain something 1,000 times and somebody doesn't understand, I need to find the way to make them understand. And I think that's really important. And then I think also being flexible and working with other people and being open to other ideas. Because, like, yeah, at the end of the day, like, this video game is me and Vicky's idea. It's our project. It's our story. We came up with it. We're the directors. But if John Smith comes up to us halfway through the semester and is like, hey...
where's Pocahontas?
Yeah. Where's Pocahontas?
Go.
He comes up to us halfway through the semester and goes, hey, I modeled this thing for the room. I know that it's different than what you guys wanted, but can you take a look at it? Be open to that new idea and that new perspective, because everybody's going to have different ideas and different ways of viewing the world. And that's like one of the rooms is about perspective and about like how you can view things from different angles to make one picture. And so I think that it's just something that I have to work on. I know I'm working on it. I'll continue to work on it for the rest of my life. But I think that's something everybody can work on a little bit, is just being a little bit more open to different viewpoints, different perspectives, different ideas, different way of doing things.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's super cool. Super good takeaway. So as much as I want to end it right there, there's still one more thing we need to talk about.
Okay.
And that's your studio.
Oh, yeah.
That you are going to make.
Yes.
She's nodding. Good. Okay, so what is that going to be about? And I know I'm sure you're still formulating it as you're going through all this. What's your studio about? Like, what's your mission statement? I'll try not to ask any more questions because that's enough right there.
So I want to open my own animation studio one day. And I don't want it to just function as like an animation studio like Pixar, Disney, or Blizzard, or where we're just pumping out stuff. I don't want us to just be making material. I want us to also be educating. So I want the studio to function in two parts, where one part is we are an animation studio and we make video games or movies or whatever the people want to make. But then the other half of the studio is we have these incredible animators, and I want them to teach kids. Because I feel like we all know, like, the way that our government is right now and the way that schools are run right now, a lot of kids don't have the exposure to the arts that they need. And arts is really important because not only are they fun and engaging and like exciting and they allow you to express yourself, but also like there are students with disabilities who, like, the arts might be the only class that they really enjoy or that they really understand. Or you might have, like, kids who feel, like, really left out and, like, outsiders in their own school, and art is the only place where they feel like they shine. And so a lot of schools have cut back the funding for arts programs. There's no more wood shop. There's no more band, things like that. And a lot of people can't afford it. Like, I don't know how people afford rent in Orange County, and nonetheless, like, taking their kid to, like, art classes or soccer practice or things like that. Like, it's just expensive now. So I want part of the studio's function to be, like, outreach, either, where we either go to lower income areas or just schools in general and teach things. But it's not just like, oh, I'm going to teach you how to draw a circle today, kids. It's like, hey, let's talk about animation and how this works. And, like, I'll teach you guys how to make a little flip book right now. Like, here's the pad of paper. I'm going to show you guys how to do a bouncing ball. And we'll walk kids through how to do that, because kids are so impressionable. And kids, you can really shape them at a young age into liking something or not liking something. And I was really fortunate when I was in 3rd grade that my mom saw that I had a talent for art, and that she saw that I was hating art because of this one teacher, and that she got me out of that class and put me in another class outside of school that I could enjoy art in. And so if it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't be here. Like, I probably wouldn't be an animation student.
And I wouldn't be in your house.
And you wouldn't be in my house drinking tea.
Yeah.
But, so I think it's really important, and I feel like the arts often get talked down as, like, a major. I feel like people act like it's not challenging enough, or people act like we don't do anything, or art is so easy, I could do that. Like, I hate when I hear people say that at a museum. I know I've said it before, but it was more so like a red canvas with a line. So, like, I could do that, but...
Well, you have those skills.
I have those skills, so I could. But what I couldn't do is the statement that they were making by doing that piece in that time period when they did it. Like, I can't do that. Yes, I can take a freaking gigantic canvas and paint it all red and draw a giant black circle in the middle of it. I can do that, but the statement that they're making is something else. Like, and while, like, oh, like, that's, like, very, like, contemporary art of you to say that. Like, yeah, but I mean, like, throughout all of art history, you've looked at, like, these artists like Van Gogh or Salvador Dali or Andy Warhol, and they did these really insane things that nobody had done before them. And it was a statement. It meant something, and it was there for a reason. And so when it comes to arts, I'd like to educate people more about, like, how, hey, the arts aren't meaningless. Like,
yeah.
You would not have any media if it wasn't for the arts.
Right.
You would not have movies. You would not have video games. You would not have that gorgeous mug sitting in front of you because somebody somewhere went to school for ceramics to learn how to make that template, to then make a mold off of it, to then take it to manufacturing, which corporate America has destroyed art. But you get what I'm saying. Like,
yeah.
The arts are so important, and people constantly want to, like, all over artists, people who go to school for art, and I want to teach people, like, hey, art is great. Then also how we all struggle with the same things. Like, every person you have had on the podcast at one point or another has mentioned, like, some form of the imposter syndrome and how, like, self-doubt and, like, frustration with themselves as an artist, or, like, coming up against, like, family not wanting them to do this. And so it's so, I think, important for us as artists, because artists tend to be, like, solitary creatures. We tend to, like, really like to be by ourselves. But it's important to understand that, like, every artist at one point or another has gone through the same thing that we are going through, like, mentally and emotionally when it comes to our work. Like, I'm going to have the biggest breakdown this weekend after I'm done with production because I'm just over it. And I know that, like, everybody I'm in production with is going to do the same thing because we're all just emotionally drained from this film. And so I think it's just important that, like, we surround ourselves with people who are going through the same thing as us and that understand what we're going through. And I think that's the cool thing about your podcast, is that it's brought out this community even more. Yeah, I really
Little
love it.
Tears
It's
going down my eye right now. You guys, you can't see
solitary
it.
tear.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks for saying that. Thanks for listening to it. And more than that, thanks for coming on it and inspiring everyone with your story and your ambitions. I can't wait to have you on the podcast next time when you're holding that Oscar.
Definitely. I will hold you to that, okay?
Yes, definitely. And I'll hold you to that film.
Okay. I guess. Yeah,
So now the last question, since you listen to the podcast, you probably know what it is. Where can people go to check out your work? I know you were talking about you're building your portfolio now, but we want to see that building with you. So where can they go?
I'm on Instagram. It's at Art by Hannah Patrico, which is Patrico. No extra I. Everybody puts an extra I. There's
like
one
Patricio
I.
or something?
Patricio, but it's Patrico. I actually just got in a fight with Joe Forkin about it because he spelled my name wrong on my portfolio. I was like, I've been in your class all semester and you still spelled my name wrong. He was like, sorry. And I'm just like, you should be.
And your website?
Yeah, and so my website is, I think it's artbyhannahpatrico.com.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I got a .com, super official. But yeah, so I'll be updating. My Instagram's more regularly updated than my website because I'd rather just upload a ton of stuff to the website at once than every day. But yeah, so both of them are the same, and then my website should be on my Instagram. So
yeah,
that's
awesome.
But yeah, those two places.
Yes, so thank you so much for having me over. And before we end, because we got Doug over here, the Douglas fir Christmas tree.
Yes.
And by the time this comes out, Christmas will be over. But I have a special gift for you.
Oh,
that we didn't have on the podcast. So you can just open that up.
Oh my goodness.
And tell me what's inside.
I feel bad I didn't get you anything now. Oh my god, bananas. I literally smelled them before I saw them. Well,
I gave her a bunch of bananas.
Thanks, man. After I told you I was traumatized by bananas, this is what you do to me.
I just thought remembering your grandma and all those great times will make you a stronger artist.
Make me a stronger artist, definitely. Well, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me over at your house and letting me talk with you and inspire all of us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you.